Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something that, it really is the unsung hero of the AV rack.
Oh, it absolutely is.
We have all been there. You are
Yeah.
setting up a keynote or maybe a massive video wall, and the content is perfect, the displays are super high-end, but then the signal just keeps dropping out.
It is the absolute nightmare scenario. And usually the culprit is not the expensive TV or the media player. It is actually the distribution hardware right in the middle.
Exactly right. So today we are looking at the Kramer DA3 18H, which is a 1:8 4K HDR HDMI distribution amplifier. And our mission here is really to separate this concept of cheap splitting from actual professional signal distribution.
Right, because if you are just splitting a signal 8 ways passively, well, you are asking for trouble. This Kramer unit sits between a high-end source and up to 8 displays, but it is doing way more than just copying the data stream.
Well, yeah, looking at the specs, the first thing that jumps out to me is the equalization and reclocking. Because I know for long cable runs, signal degradation is just the enemy. You get voltage drop and you get jitter.
Precisely. At 18 gigabits per second bandwidth, which is what this needs to handle HDMI 2.0B and full 4K HDR, the tolerances are incredibly tight.
Right, you cannot just push it blindly down the line.
No, you really cannot. This unit effectively rebuilds the signal entirely. It restores the amplitude and corrects the timing before sending it out to those 8 outputs.
So it is reconstructing the signal integrity so it arrives
Yeah.
looking exactly how it left the source. It's not just boosting the volume, it is actually cleaning up the noise.
That is the critical distinction. And since it supports 6 gigabits per second per graphic channel, you avoid all those awful compression artifacts you see with lesser hardware.
Now, the feature that I think solves the absolute biggest headache for integrators is the smart output scaling. Because we have all dealt with the mixed screen problem, right? You build a network of shiny 4K displays, but then you have to plug in one legacy 1080p monitor for a back office feed.
And in a traditional setup, the source detects that single 1080p device and downgrades the resolution for the entire system.
Which totally defeats the purpose of buying 4K screens in the first place. Everyone gets 1080p just because of one weak link.
Exactly. But this unit handles it per port. It detects that the display on port 8 is 1080p and downscales the video signal just for that specific output.
While the other 7 outputs keep getting pristine 4K.
Yes, it isolates the legacy hardware so it does not drag down the rest of your system.
That is a massive workflow saver. But let's talk about color space for a second, because I noticed the Force RGB feature. Usually we want the display to handle that conversion, but I have seen plenty of screens claim they support YCBCR and then just display a weird pink or green tint.
That is exactly why this feature exists. Some displays just have very poor internal color space conversion. By forcing the output to RGB, you bypass the display processing entirely and deliver the NATO color format.
So the picture looks correct even if the display firmware is acting up.
It ensures that baseline quality. Seems like so much of this really comes down to managing the handshake properly, which brings us to EDID. Intelligent EDID handling is simply non-negotiable at this level.
Right, because if the source and the display do not agree on capabilities during that handshake, you just get a black screen.
And this unit lets you manage that rather than leaving it to chance. You can capture the EDID from a connected display or use a default setup to force the source to behave. It also gives you control over HDCP 2.2 authorization.
So if you need to strip encryption or ensure compliance for protected content, you have that switchable control right there. And strictly from an installation standpoint, I appreciate that they kept the form factor practical. It is a half 19-inch 1RU enclosure.
Which means you can easily rack mount 2 of them side by side. And it uses passive cooling, so it is totally fanless.
Which is key for conference rooms.
Yeah.
You do not want a piece of gear whirring away in the ceiling during a really quiet meeting.
Absolutely. It really illustrates that in the world of 4K and HDR, the hardware between the source and the screen is just as critical as the TV itself.
It highlights the sheer amount of unseen intelligence required just to keep a picture on your screen.
And it raises a question worth considering. As our environments get more complex with mixed resolutions from 1080p all the way to 8K, how much computing power are we going to need hidden in these little boxes just to ensure we can see a simple image?
Yeah, it makes you wonder if eventually the cables themselves will need their own operating systems just to keep up with the displays. Something for you to think about the next time you plug in an HDMI cable. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.